So P. Diddy is back in the news today, which of course is bad news for Diddy, but also the specifics here are wild. Because right now there's a grand jury in New York hearing from his victims, as well as there now being a massive investigation by the Rolling Stone that alleges that he actually has a much longer history of abuse than the recent claims would suggest. Now, to start with the grand jury out of New York, there's not a ton to say there yet, though we do know that they're hearing from people who have sued Diddy for abuse, although we don't know if they're hearing from all 8 people who have brought lawsuits against him. But one thing that it definitely shows is that the government is ramping up its pressure on Diddy. Because a grand jury, it's one of the first hurdles they need to clear before they can bring formal charges against him. Although really, it's not much of a bar. There's an old legal saying that you can convince a grand jury to bring charges against anything since the bar is so low. But more interesting, at least today, is the news from Rolling Stone, which conducted a 6-month investigation into Combs and spoke with a ton of people from his past. And because I see my job is trying to make everything consumable, I'm not going to go into every single detail here. You can click the link down below to go into the full thing. But we're going to touch on some of it and know that it details a long history of anger and violence from Diddy. With, for example, colleagues telling Rolling Stone that back in 1994, they had to pull Diddy off a woman at their offices because they could hear him beating her. While in another incident, Diddy almost got into another altercation with another woman before being restrained. Then in 2000, he allegedly beat the shit out of a fellow music executive in a hotel room because he had a relationship with Diddy's ex. In 2001, he sexually harassed a freelance graphic designer who was at a party he was throwing to celebrate his acquittal in a shooting trial. Fortunately, at that time, it didn't escalate to complete physical violence as the woman managed to slide away, but not before Diddy was allegedly a real creep by massaging her shoulders and saying things like, "Oh yeah, you like that? No, you like that." But one of the worst allegations came from his time at Howard University. And, at that time, he had a reputation for hosting crazy parties. But, things got brought up, like an incident where he showed up at a woman's dorm and he was screaming for a girlfriend and acting belligerent, with multiple people telling the outlet roughly the same story. One alleged witness saying he screamed and hollered and acted a stone fool until she came downstairs. And then, when his girlfriend finally went downstairs, he began beating her and was screaming at the top of his lungs and that he whooped her butt, like really whooped her butt, with then other women from the dorm intervening before the attack eventually stopped. And during this investigation, the Rolling Stones spoke with about 50 people connected to Diddy in his past, and they found that some suggested that he was like this due to abandonment issues. And so sometimes it was so bad that he wouldn't let the women in his life move on, like when he and J-Lo broke up. He apparently had his staff stand outside MTV's TRL studios with signs to win her back. Though clearly that did not work there, and it also seems to have escalated from there because later on, exes like Cassie Ventura, or the one whose beating was caught on camera in a hotel, she said that Diddy would have his cronies hunt her down and pressure her to come back, with sometimes that pressure including things like threatening to not release her music. And all of that lining up with statements made by his ex Kim Porter, who said that in the past Diddy would call her 50 to 60 times a day. And a lot of these new allegations, such as the Howard University incident, they'd probably be interesting for prosecutors who might want to speak to witnesses or the victims. And not because they could use it to bring more charges since they're past the statute of limitations in most cases, but because it can still help their case. Though notably, there's a small problem there because in many of these cases, the victims themselves didn't want to talk to Rolling Stone. And then even when they would speak, in other cases, witnesses spoke on the condition of anonymity, right? Either because they didn't want the spotlight or they feared repercussions. But, with all that said, the big thing that just, I think it's hard not to wonder is how many victims are there? Because we now have the video of one beating and we hear all these other situations of him just acting like a maniac. And you just can't help but wonder how many other skeletons are in his closet. If he's just been like this, how much has he swept under the rug over his lifetime?